Everybody, the Conservatives are in search of a new leader, and Lisa Raitt is going to help. CP24 is reporting, quote, former Conservative MP Lisa Raitt to help run race to replace Scheer. And here's the report. It says a high-profile Conservative who lost her seat in the last election will lead the effort to elect a replacement for party leader Andrew Scheer. The Conservative Party has announced that Lisa Raitt will co-chair the organizing committee for the upcoming leadership race. That contest was kicked into gear after Scheer announced earlier this month he will resign as soon as a new leader is chosen. Raitt, along with Dan Nolan, who oversaw the race Scheer won in 2017, will be in charge of a group of Tories who will set the rules and timing for the vote. Raitt ran as well in the 2017 campaign and would later be appointed Scheer's deputy leader. But she lost her Toronto area seat in October, a result that underscored the Tories' dismal election showing in Ontario. Actually, it's a result that underscores the demographic shift that has been rampant and overwhelmingly favors the Liberals. That's what happened. It has nothing to do with how poorly the Tories did in the election. It has everything. I mean, realistically, and I've talked about this before, incumbents have an advantage, like a really big advantage, unless they get flooded, their community gets flooded with a whole bunch of people who are going to vote Liberal. And that's exactly what happened. So that's why Ms. Raitt lost her seat. It wasn't Andrew Scheer's fault that she lost her seat. Sorry, everyone who wants to believe that. Back to this. I've scrolled down a little bit. Raitt's position as co-chair of the organizing committee means she won't be among the former leadership candidates vying for the job again. I scroll down again. The Conservative Party says next steps for the organizing committee will be to determine the time frame for the election and the requirements for applicants. That will include a potential entry fee and number of signatures required to support their nomination. So, I mean, that's interesting. And we've said that the leader won't be announced at least, or at the latest, I suppose, November 14th, which is the Conservative Convention in 2020. And that seems like a really long time when you've got a minority government with Trudeau, while increasing the population of cities like Vernon and North Bay by, 100,000 people, right? Vernon's going from between 30 and 40,000 people population to 130,000 people population. Why? Because they need jobs, according to the Trudeau government. In the next 10 years, they're going to need a bunch of jobs, or they're going to need a bunch of people to fill open employment opportunities. And without them, businesses won't thrive. And interesting, I reported on this yesterday. A person I know, Bill Tufts, has been talking about this for the last couple of weeks, and I've been paying attention, and I thought that was a compelling story, so I picked it up. And the amount of feedback I've gotten from people either in Vernon or people who live in the Okanagan area is incredible. Like, it's probably one of the biggest responses I've gotten to a story in the last 6 months anyway, which says a lot, right? Like, there's been a lot happening in the last 6 months. So there's a lot of interest in this story. People from Vernon saying there's no jobs in this region, there's no jobs in this city, and we already have homeless people. And we have drug problems as well, which echoes what's happening in my city too, right? Although in my city, I have to say there are employment opportunities, but we have universities, we have infrastructure, we're close to Toronto, we're close to the Kitchener-Waterloo region, so it's different fundamentally, right? But I don't know much about Vernon in the Okanagan Valley. I don't know much about it, so I'm just going by what I'm hearing, and what I'm hearing from people who live there or who say they live there is no jobs and no houses, and the houses you can get, or the housing you can get, is expensive. So, last story for this morning. I'm keeping it brief. It's Boxing Day. Get out there and consume, everyone. No, hang out with your family and play with your toys. But this one I thought was really, really interesting. It talks about climate change. And I talk about this a lot, climate change and historical behavior. Your past behavior is a good indicator of what you're going to do in the future, right? The things that you've done in the past is a good indicator of how you will behave in the future. And with that in mind, and the article makes the same point, but with that in mind, here we go. Climate policies based on fantasy. To expose the absurd and unrealistic commitments Canadian governments have made regarding human-induced climate change, let's look at what they've done as opposed to what they've said they were going to do. In 2009, then Prime Minister Stephen Harper committed Canada under the United Nations Copenhagen Accord to reducing our industrial greenhouse gas emissions to 17% below 2005 levels by 2020. With 2020 1 week away, let's examine where Canada stands on achieving that target. which Prime Minister Justin Trudeau adopted when he came to power following a decade of Conservative governments, 2009 to 2015, and Liberal governments, 2015 to 2019. Canada's greenhouse gas emissions in 2005 were 730 megatons annually. 1 megaton, or 1 MT, represents 1 million tons. At 17%, a 17% reduction means the Harper-Trudeau target for 2020 is 606 megatons. Okay? According to the last year for which federal government figures are available, Canada emitted 716 megatons in 2017, up 8 megatons from 2016. To reach the Harper-Trudeau target for 2020, Canada's emissions will have to drop by 110 megatons, 716 megatons to 606 megatons in 1 year. Okay, Canada's major sources of industrial greenhouse gas emissions are the oil and gas sector, 195 megatons, transportation, 174 megatons, buildings, 85 megatons, electricity, 74 megatons, heavy industry, 73 megatons, agriculture, 72 megatons, and waste disposal, 42 megatons. Thus, to achieve Canada's 2020 target, the Trudeau government will have to shut down in 1 year the equivalent of 56% of the oil and gas sector, or 63% of the transportation sector. Alternatively, they could shut down 100% of either the building, electricity, heavy industry, agriculture, or waste disposal sector and still have to find additional reductions elsewhere. None of those scenarios is going to happen because they're impossible to achieve in 1 year and utterly absurd. What it demonstrates is how unrealistic Canada's 2020 target is, just as its 2030 target of reducing emissions to 30% below 2005 levels is absurd, along with Trudeau's latest pledge to reduce our emissions to net zero by 2050. Given that the best indicator of future performance is past practice, the reality is Liberal and Conservative federal governments have been setting emission reduction targets for 31 years and have missed every one of them. It's time they started telling Canadians the truth, or it's time we just stopped chasing this unicorn. Here's the reality of greenhouse gas emissions. They run in lockstep with population and industry. The growth of industry is to increase CO2 emissions. So the idea that we are going to reduce CO2 emissions while continuing to grow the economy is patently ridiculous. It is impossible. Again, look at British Columbia. They've had a carbon tax for 10 years. Their industry has increased. Their carbon emissions have increased faster than the Canadian untaxed average. Why is that? Because CO2 is actually, and this carbon economy they're trying to create is like a secondary shadow economy that makes money. And there are much more intelligent people out there who do the chalkboard drawing. I'm sure you've seen it on Facebook and scrolled past it. I've seen it a couple of times with the carbon economy, and there was another scam that they were trying to expose on how it works, and how it actually creates money for the people who are saying they're using this money to fight climate change, which is not true. There's no amount of tax money that is going to change the weather. Not in Canada, not in the United States, not in Europe, not in Asia. Maybe in Asia. Those Chinese can do some crazy things. I've seen them propose building mountains to change weather patterns. So maybe they could build a mountain. But there is no amount of tax money that is going to fundamentally lower the CO2 that humans contribute to the atmosphere. Because more humans, more population, and that's what Canada's policies are gunning for. 100 million people by 2100. That's what the policies state. Check StatsCan. I've done shows on this. More people means higher CO2. There is no way around this. So this is a very anti-human policy. This is a very anti-person policy, no matter which way you slice it. And the taxes they're trying to layer on, and the fact that all of these people, news organizations, etc., are saying it's never good enough. The weather's changing. We need more money. What are they doing with this money? Give me some solid. We did this and it reduced it by this many megatons. I know it's false. It's not true. The megatons continually increase, belying the lie, right? British Columbia's emissions increase, Canada's as a whole increase, according to its own data. So what are they doing with the money? What have they been doing since 2015 with the strong environmental mandate, ignoring discharging sewage into our waterways, ignoring a lot of the really low-hanging fruit that any sane person who cared about the living environment that we live in would prioritize. Instead, they fly around the world attending conferences, virtue signaling, and doing nothing for the Canadian environment. Zero. Hypocrites to the highest order. So that's where we are. Our historical behavior is to promise the world while delivering nothing and taxing Canadians on top of it. Enjoy. Welcome to 2020. So the next decade, they can say 25% under 2005 levels. And when we miss it, what'll happen? Because right now we're 5 days from 2020 and we've missed the targets by a lot. 110 megatons by the latest number standards, and the latest numbers are 2017. So it's probably more, right? So, and what's going to happen? Are you going to march on Ottawa? Are you? Really? No, because Canada's too big, too broad, right? Alberta's far too far away, British Columbia, etc. There's plane fare, airfare, and a real life to get to. Telling the government you're upset with them is supposed to be done by elections, but all they have to do, Justin Trudeau, is own Toronto, and that's 50 seats. That's enough to put them over. Clearly. And not to say that the Tories have no hand in the election loss. I'm not saying that. Mr. Scheer was a weak candidate, and I said that from the beginning. But all of that said, the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior. And well, here we are on the doorstep of missing targets that, if you believe the rhetoric, mean the end of the world is coming by 2030. But in a decade, when nothing meaningful has changed, when the goalposts have been moved again, what's net zero? Go look into it. What's net zero? Yeah, they're not even going to pretend they're reducing carbon emissions anymore. They're just pretending, oh, it's net zero. We grew all these trees. See all these trees? It's managing expectations of the population. It is a PR campaign. That is what this is. It is not doing what they said they were going to do. And now they're moving the goalposts without people realizing it. Net zero. Yay, net zero. Net zero, not realizing that CO2 reduction is, okay, that's enough ranting for me. Have a wonderful Boxing Day. Spend it with your family. Play with your new toys. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com and have a wonderful, wonderful day.